Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, and I direct events here at the Strand. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a black man in a robin's egg blue shirt. Before we launch into a discussion of J.P. Brammer's new book, Hola Papi, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors like JP and Jeff, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so truly appreciative of it. And so tonight we are thrilled to have with us John Paul Brammer for the launch of his new memoir, Hola Papi, How to Come Out in a Walmart Parking Lot and Other Life Lessons. JP is an author, illustrator, and columnist from rural Oklahoma, currently living in Brooklyn. He runs the popular advice column Hola Papi on Substack. His work, including essays, short fiction, and illustrations, has appeared in The Washington Post, Food and Wine, Catapult, Business Insider, and many more. This is his first book. He runs a print shop where he puts his artwork and designs at holapapishop.com. You can keep up with him on Twitter or Instagram at JP Brammer. Joining JP in conversation tonight is Jeff VanderMeer. Jeff is the New York Times bestselling author of the Southern Reach trilogy, the first book of which, Annihilation, won the Shirley Jackson Award and was made into a movie by Alex Garland. Other novels include the critically acclaimed Born, Dead Astronaut, and Hummingbird Salamander. VanderMeer's nonfiction has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, and Atlantic.com, among others. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming JP and Jeff to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm really just honored to be here on the launch day for Hola Papi. And thanks so much to the Strand for hosting this event. I found this to be a wonderful, generous, honest book to just kind of leap in there a bit. And also I wanted to say that I met you through Twitter. Something funny somebody retweeted that you'd said, and you say several thousand funny things a day, which is amazing. And I was like, wow, this guy's amazing, just from the tweets. And then I found your art, and because you often do art of animals like vultures and things, I was really drawn to that as well and really loved that. And then when I read the book, I was like, what can this person not do? Because I love this book. I mean, it's just a wonderful, honest, but also very layered and thoughtful, but also very sharp and funny account. And so, I was wondering, maybe you could just say, how do you feel about this book right now? In this moment?
So one funny anecdote I wanted to share was I actually didn't put two and two together when I first followed you. We were talking about animals one day, and I was like, my internet bestie and I love talking about animals or whatever. And one of my gay friends texted me and was like, why are you casually tweeting with the author of Annihilation? And I was like, wait, what? And I understood what was going on, but social media is a place for magical realism of that sort. But thank you for doing this event with me. We're going to have a great time. And how do I feel about this book? How do I feel about this book? I wrote it 2 years ago at this point.
Yeah, and you've been waiting.
Yes,
for this moment.
It's like a gardener type thing. It's like you planted this so long ago, and now that it's actually come up out of the ground where people can see it, it's just like a very full circle moment for you in a way that it maybe wouldn't be for someone who wasn't there before it was anything, when you were just putting it together. So it's very satisfying, very scary, very vulnerable. I've just been dizzy all day with it because this is something I've been waiting to do for most of my life. And now that it's here, I'm just like, what have I done?
Well, you've done it in a very big way because the New York Times had an amazing review today, and there's been a lot of other great press for release day.
So I woke up this morning to a text saying, the New York Times reviewed your book, period. And I was like, oh no.
That's my reaction too, usually.
Worded so ominously with a period at the end, I was like, I know what that period means. That period means that I've been trashed in the paper of record. And I'm going to have to go hiding in shame, and I can never go by Papi again. I have to take off my sombrero. It's over for me. Then I read it, and I was like, oh my God, thank God. I love to pretend that I'm like a strong author who doesn't really mind what critics have to say.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. I'm a maverick. I'm a firebrand. No, I don't think I can stomach my first book being trashed by the New York Times. So thank God.
And I think it's worse now with social media. Back in my day when they just had printing presses, things happen much more slowly. So you can acclimate to it. Now it's just like thing after thing after thing. And you know, you can have days where like, oh, I'm great. No, I'm terrible. Oh, I'm great. I'm terrible. You know, we can do that with Twitter anyway.
Go to that person's house, challenge them to a duel.
Right.
Dare them to say it to your face. Can't do that anymore.
So,
right.
Yeah. So I've been reading some of the interviews you've been doing, and in Vice, you said that you were quoted as saying, language is imperfect, identities are imperfect, labels are imperfect. And so I was curious, in writing a book like this, does it feel more somehow permanent than something that's on the internet? Do you worry more about being misunderstood? And you know, I'm just curious how you see it as being different.
Yeah, it feels like this book has been tattooed on my body at this point. I recognize that something irreversible and unerasable has happened. There's so many copies of this book floating around. And I remember when someone first sent me a picture just yesterday of like the poster of my cover in a bookshop window and the copies just on a table. And I thought, oh dear, I have locked myself into something here, because my past work has all been on the internet. And while, yes, that's permanent as well, there is this weird malleable sort of vibe that the internet has where things are constantly shifting, they're constantly shuffling. A book is a much slower moving thing, and people have way more time to look at it, to observe new things about it. And it's very vulnerable. It's very frightening. So yeah, this is definitely something that is going to stick around a whole lot more. And I just really hope that me 2 years ago, who was writing this book, knew what he was doing, because my goodness, we're in it now.
And and with regard to the column, I mean, you leave yourself kind of vulnerable there too, but you've probably gotten used to that in that kind of forum. Have you gotten to the point where you're comfortable tackling like almost any question that comes to you by now, or are there things that you just won't tackle in the column?
Most of the questions I don't answer just based on like, you know, either I don't have an answer or I don't have time or it isn't quite my thing. But yeah, the vast majority, I'm just like, no, I'm not touching that. Thank you. Some of them just have like something to do with some discourse that's going on online. And I'm like, I would have to be a fool, a professional rodeo clown, to like lure the bull over in my direction for no reason in that way. Like I don't like into anything super topical like that. But you know, it's very instinctual. I'm a very instinct-driven creature. It's if I read a question and the answer is just singing out to me, and I know it'll be easy to write because I can feel the rhythm of it, I pursue it. Yeah. I'm very much that way with everything I do. I'm not a planner. I don't sit down and say, here's how my book will be structured. Here's how this project is going to take shape. I more just throw words at something based on this invisible rhythm I have in my head. And I think, okay, I can draw this out for as long as I need to until a project comes out of it. And that's just sort of how I work. I'm very envious of writers who can bring a level of intricacy and a level of, there's like a little bit more craft work involved with some pieces. For me, it's a lot of vibes going on.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's really important. I mean, I work a lot by progressions and the beat of something. And if it's not right, it's harder to write. And then you stumble over it. And if you're giving advice, I'm just writing fiction. If you're giving advice, I think it's even more important that it be natural and flowing in the right way. Now, Vox did say in an interview, you said that you have a backlog of 700 messages for your column. Does that mean have you gone through all those messages yet? And you just haven't decided if you're going to, or they're just literally unread, waiting to be read?
So easily intrigued by new things that I'm way more likely to answer a new letter than I am to go back and dig for an old one. Because in my mind, it's like now there are just so many in that inbox that I'm just like kind of daunted by it. I don't want to go back and read all those and try to find something I can answer. Usually I just look at the new ones and I'm like, oh, this one's cool. Let's do that. And also like my timing with them is really weird. So I took like a 2-month hiatus recently, and then I wrote like 2 in a row last week. So I don't know how I work, honestly. I just like, whatever I wake up and start doing, I just kind of do.
And do you ever hear back again from those readers personally, or
the
ones that you answer?
Every once in a little while, I do.
Yeah.
And it's always a treat, because one of the weird unspoken truths of the internet advice column is that your primary focus is not really to fix this one person's life or even just speak to this one person. It kind of has to primarily exist as an internet artifact that hundreds of people can look at and enjoy or get something out of or feel like they were seen by it. And so otherwise I'd be like a consultant or a therapist, which are jobs that do not appeal to me whatsoever. So I have to make sure that my columns are entertaining, that a whole lot of people can see themselves in whatever I respond with. And so if the person who it was addressed to actually comes back and says, hey, that was great, it really helped me, which sometimes happens, it's really icing on the cake for me. I really love it. But yeah, I don't really think like, gosh, I sure do hope I fixed this young gay person's life today, because I don't think that I've done that very often.
But you don't usually get a response like, thanks so much, thanks for nothing.
You ruined my life.
Well, not ruined life, but like, thanks so much.
No, but I did get this really funny response one time. They've all been positive. This one's just funny, where they wrote me in saying, I think that my job is discriminating against me on the basis of my astrological sun sign. They want to fire me because I'm a Libra or something. And I like responded, and then she responded back like a week later, being like, oh my God, they found this. And it was very much like the last sort of recording before they got and eaten by the aliens. You know what I mean? Like they found it, have to run. That was so funny. And I responded back like, "Are you okay?" And like nothing.
Nothing. Yeah. Oh dear. Well,
I hope you're okay, Libra, wherever you are out in the world.
Yeah.
All right.
So, this is a memoir. The book is a memoir. It has, aspects of an advice to it. I think people can get advice out of it if they want, but it's definitely different in form from the column. And I was curious, did you have, sometimes I have like a fiction, influences that I've thought about before I start writing. Sometimes I don't, it's like totally from real life. Did you have any kind of like, do you read memoirs? Do you read nonfiction? Was there anyone who was kind of a lodestar or somebody you thought of when you were writing this? Or
so I would say my biggest literary influence in my life is Alice Munro. She is this old white woman from Canada who does short stories in the fiction format. But what she does is called psychological realism. So she likes to go really in depth on the psychological landscapes that pop up whenever something happens, and really describing and putting into words exactly what someone is feeling and how they're feeling it, with really beautiful words. My favorite example that I like to give from her writing that really touched me is there's this one passage that she wrote about this young girl. She's going on a train for the first time in her whole life, leaving her small town in Canada where her parents are kind of abusive. They're not outright detestable, but they hit her every once in a while, and they're not terribly nice. And it's her very first time escaping them and sort of getting to see the big city. And she boards this train, and as an extra layer of enjoyment for this day she's having, where she gets to liberate herself from her horrible parents, she orders a little carton of chocolate milk. And when she gets the chocolate milk, she sips it, and she realizes that it's spoiled. And she describes how she keeps taking little sips of it because she refuses to accept that something so desired could betray her so thoroughly. And I just thought that there was a whole world encapsulated in that one little action, that one description of like, but I want this thing to work, and it betrayed me. Why won't it just work? And so you sip at it again and again because you just want this thing to work out for you. I love stuff like that. And so when I read stuff like that, I think, oh God, I just want to give vocabulary and words to experiences in that way, the micro experiences that way. I do a very different work from her, obviously. This is nonfiction, memoir, essays, but I really have that goal with my prose, where I just want to be able to capture certain sentiments that are elusive, that we all have, and that we maybe can't quite put into words in the way that we would like to. That's when I'm winning on the page, to me. That's when I'm doing my best work, I think. Don't always get there, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see that. I really was thinking as I was reading these essays that I was also reading as somebody who had read a lot of fiction and applied like fiction technique to essays, because they're so layered and in the moment, and you have such a great eye for detail.
Thank you.
That was such a pleasure to read and just be carried through these things and really be able to see everything so clearly, as well as all these comic touches too. I was going to say, you have an incredible sense of comic timing, which for me is like you can see like the absurdity and contradictions and things, and that comes out as humor. Is that something that's like just always been part of you? Is it something that was easy for you to capture on the page, or something you had to work at hard, or?
It was always something I aspired to. And I have a lot of things backing that up. The first one being that, like I talk about in the How to Lose a Rabbit chapter, the boy Patty who comes in and he's moving into a really tiny, very homophobic, sort of like conservative town, but he's wearing pink and he's expressing all these mannerisms that anyone else would get destroyed for or bullied for. But they let him get away with it because he's funny. And so I learned that lesson very early in life, that if you can make people laugh, you can get away with a whole lot more. You can say more things, you can express more things if people just think you're funny. And of course, when I talk about it in the book as well, that when I was in middle school, my personality just was not there. I was very unpleasant to be around. I was condescending. I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be funny. And I always thought of it as this hugely aspirational thing because I knew how much freedom that could afford you. Added to that is, so my mom, whenever she would talk about someone when I was a kid, the highest compliment she could give another person was, "Oh, and he's so witty." Like that was just like the most prized thing you could possibly be in my family's eyes. And we roast each other all the time. Like whenever we get together, we just have nonstop jokes about each other. So you have to be very much on your toes. So I really developed it as a survival mechanism, as a way to move through life a little bit easier, while also being able to give the truths that I wanted to get out in an easier, more digestible way. So it's a muscle that I just dedicated myself to working out quite a bit, which is not terribly funny to think about, but it leads to some funny things at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've really seen someone with the kind of comic, I'll just say it, genius that you've got in this book. And I think it underpins the seriousness, because these are very serious essays at times too, but I think that makes them, it brings like the totality of the situation to life in a way it wouldn't otherwise. One question I have, it's maybe a dangerous question, is has anyone who's in the book, who's described in the book, read the book?
So
read their portrayal?
I have a really exciting story to share. So before this book even came out, when it was still in its conception phases, I knew that I wanted to write that book about Corey. I wanted to write the title chapter, How to Come Out to Your Boyfriend in a Walmart Parking Lot, just because it was one of the richest experiences I've ever had in my life. It was one of the longest lasting. I was in this sort of quote unquote closeted relationship with this guy for 4 or 5 years. My best friend from high school, who I met because he was trying to convert me to his Christian youth cult, and we ended up getting lunch together every day while he was trying to convert me. And I ended up accidentally killing God for him, and then we started like a relationship together. I was so nervous, so deathly afraid of what he would think about that chapter, that in pure cowardice, I just could not work up the courage to reach out to him and be like, "Hey, I'm writing this thing about you. You should probably do up for that." I was terrified. And today, just today, I get a text from him being like, "Haha, bro, love that chapter about me. I remember when we used to jerk each other off. Good memories." He called me bro.
Is that what you expected as a response?
I was
What did you expect as a response?
I was hooting, I was hollering. Well, I thought he was gonna be like, "Damn, bro, I can't believe you were going through all that. Sorry." Or he was gonna be mad and be like, "I can't believe you heard about that secret stuff." Yeah. We were very much in like this closeted relationship. Yeah. Like literally everyone else in the book, I don't really care. It's just like, these are oftentimes people who are either like very much a part of my life to this day, or kind of out and about in LGBTQ literary world, they get it.
Right.
Or they're people who, bullied me half to death or assaulted me or something. So I'm just
right. So you're not,
I don't really give a shit. But with Corey, I was like, oh my God, I'm terrified of what he's going to think. It's going to be awful. He's going to say something really horrible about my book, and then some mid-tier blog is going to pick it up and it's going to blow up online and I'm going to be destroyed. I was making all these horror theories in my head about Corey's reaction. And he's like, oh, remember when we used to jack each other off, bro? That was funny. I'm glad you wrote about that. I was like,
did you reply?
I was like, I'm glad to hear that, Corey. Hope you're well. Because the thing is, my hometown wouldn't have known about this damn book if they hadn't put it on that billboard in Manhattan. And then everyone in my hometown was like, oh my God, country boys on the billboard in Manhattan. He made it. That's our boy, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I hope none of you read this book, though.
So a couple more questions, and then I think you were going to do a reading from the book, but just a couple questions about a couple of the essays. There's so much stuff I could ask you here. It could go on forever, but we're also going to have time for reader questions at the end, too.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about how to describe a dick, which is actually in part about how to describe a dick. But to me, it was also about life as a freelance writer. And we could focus on either one of those, but I was curious, was that life as exciting as you had imagined it? And would you recommend it? And do you think it toughened you up?
You have to be utterly delusional to take the writing path that I took. And I am just delusional enough to have done it. Like, I truly believed, despite all my setbacks, despite barely being able to make friends and maybe having to move back to the farm in Oklahoma, I still thought there is something about me that has a lot of potential. I have a lot of talent. I have something to offer this world. I just have to keep going until I get there. And that is very much unhinged. That is a thing that is difficult to believe. And I believed it. So it's just like, if you can actually have that belief about yourself, then yes, you should pursue it, because you should honor that. Passion is so hard to find in this life. You're not guaranteed it. You can easily mosey yourself through this life from birth to death, never really believing in yourself, never really holding that thing in your brain that you actually want to do, and never actually pursuing it, sure. But if you are just out of your mind enough to do it, I think you should. And I did, even though, as in that chapter I talk about, I was doing some pretty strange gigs. I was doing a lot of weird stuff.
What do you consider the weirdest gig that you ever got? Whether it's in the book or not. Yeah.
I do want to say it's the porn recaps. That was just next level. Because like, it wasn't so much the recapping porn, that's kind of normal. It was the fact that it was all being like assigned to me by this mysterious twink from Prague who would just like message me on Skype being like, hey JP, I have a new assignment for you. Like, I'm some sort of hitman. Give me like a password to some gay porn site so I could log in and sort of like catch the gifs and write up and recap the porn. That was definitely my lowest.
And was it just the repetition of the description, or I mean, did you, or was that not? I mean, I saw that at the end of the essay that thick was the answer.
No,
your problem of trying to describe. But
the worst part was that I couldn't be super overtly sexual because I had to.
Oh, right. That's right.
Like, like, I have to get you interested in the porn to watch it, but I can't just make porn. It can't be porn. Otherwise, you're not going to get through to the cocky boys or whatever. So like, okay, I have to do a little tease here. Really wild. It really like made me had to hone a lot of literary muscles that I didn't ever want to touch.
Well, I would say my serious question I was going to ask before you're reading now is just going to seem like totally tonally a non sequitur. So maybe if there was something you wanted to read to give viewers a kind of a taste of the book, and then also if you have questions, please do start putting them in Ask a Question, because we will have 20 minutes for the questions at the end.
I'm just going to do story time. I want to read. I want to read from my favorite chapter in the book, and I don't really know why it's my favorite, or even if I even actually have a favorite, or if I'm just saying that. But it is the chapter where I write about falling in love in a more healthy way than I did with Corey in the Walmart parking lot chapter. This is more like the act of someone sort of loving you back and sort of falling into it with someone, but then also falling out of it, and all of the fictions that we bring to looking at another person when we're in love with them. And I think that those are necessary fictions, because we're human beings. We're not looking at the raw facts of everything all the time. We have to bring some level of illustration and some level of fantasy to the things we're doing, or we start to lose our minds. So this part of the book that I'm reading is after all the love stuff has happened and I move away and I'm going to come see this guy for the first time since we stopped seeing each other, like face-to-face conversation. I'm going back to Austin. We're meeting at a bar, and I'm hoping that we fall back in love again. So, and also, like, one thing to know about this book is that it is sort of like advice column format. So if you see me say the word Loveless here, it's because the writer's name is signed Loveless. Don't want to confuse you. Okay, here we go. It was almost a year later that I would return to Austin. My college roommate wanted to go, and who was I to turn down another ill-fated road trip to Texas? We drove down together and stayed in a motel. On the ride over, I texted Thomas, as I knew I would, telling him I was visiting and that I'd love to see him, and to my surprise, he texted back. He said he'd be down to get lunch. I dressed up in our shitty motel room and headed to a bar where we'd agreed to meet. I privately hoped, Loveless, that things would reignite. I told myself we were still the same elements we'd been before. The same chemical reaction was entirely possible, logical even. We would see each other, and we would remember why our time together had been so special. Maybe he'd invite me over to his house, and I wouldn't have to sleep on the air mattress on the floor in the Motel 6. My roommate was incredibly cheap, so we booked a single bed and took shifts on the ground. The bar had a tacky 70s theme and a plain menu of burgers, fries, and grilled chicken. I got there first. I slid into a booth and pretended to be enraptured by the menu while I waited for Thomas to arrive, my heart thumping as it had a year before. A man walked in. Thomas, but not Thomas. He was limping. He lumbered up and slid into his seat opposite me. "How's it going?" he said, his voice familiar but coarser. He had white whiskers poking out of his beard and bloodshot eyes. He sounded lazy and uninterested, as if there were any number of things he could have been doing right then, but here he was as a matter of obligation. "Good to see you," I said, ashamed of my own eagerness in the face of his apathy. "Are you all right? You're limping." "Yeah," he said, got into a fight. He said it so simply, as if it were something I should have guessed. "Did you win?" I asked. "No," he said. He told me things hadn't really worked out with the other guy he'd been seeing, but that was fine, because he wasn't really interested in seeing anyone. He hadn't told anyone else he was gay since we'd last seen each other. He didn't feel he needed to. He said all these things with a callous boredom, pointed, I thought, at my silly idea of meeting up again. "I see," I repeated, reduced to an idiot who only said one thing. "I see." "Well," he said, food still on his plate, "I better get going soon." "Yeah," I said, wondering who this person was. "Same here." It was a feeble attempt at saving face, at pretending I hadn't wanted anything in particular. I got up and, feeling drunk but sober, wobbled along in front of him to the exit. A terrible possibility was unfolding in front of me. "Well, it was nice to see you," he said, somewhat kinder than before, perhaps apologizing in a small way for not caring. "Yup," I said, seizing on what little high ground he'd afforded me. I walked the other way, pretending that was where I'd parked, and left him. After I'd made some distance on the sidewalk, I saw him limping off in final mockery of everything I'd held on to so childishly over the past year. I ducked into an antique store, unwilling to face the world after such an utter humiliation, and sequestered in a corner under a heap of knickknacks. I cried into my hands. The terrible possibility was that maybe the Thomas I'd been so enamored with hadn't really gone away. It could very well have been that he never existed in the first place. This Thomas, the haggard one with bloodshot eyes and no warmth to spare, had been the same Thomas from the summer. Maybe love, or its evil sibling, infatuation, had made him something else in my eyes. When I thought about it, really thought about it, what had been his defining features? What had his personality been? Who had he been other than a man who had excited me? And what if it wasn't Thomas I'd been missing all this time? What if it had been the act of loving, the moving through life while loving, the way of seeing myself while loving, the splendid shapes love makes of the world, the way it takes the mundane and twists it into something altogether worthier? He's probably in his car now, driving back to some house I'd never seen, to a life I actually knew next to nothing about, and never would. And all the things he knew about me, my favorite songs, the parts of my body I didn't like that were more sensitive or ticklish, the stories about my family and about Oklahoma, things that had once added up to something special, potent trappings of an interesting person worth getting to know, were now reduced to trivia. I hardly cared about them myself in that light. I took a night drive through Austin, indulging in the exquisite, gentle pangs of nostalgia. There was Barton Springs, there was the grocery store, where was Dave? And there was the house, the plum-colored door with the oak leaf knocker, the only thing that had remained more or less the same, a faithful friend. I drove by the film festival office in its cage full of scripts. I had a notion then, one that made me feel a little better and one that has stuck with me over the years. A new way to look at memory. What if, Loveless, memory is an act of creation? Our brains don't hold perfect records of the things that have happened, a Rolodex we can cycle through and call upon for official accounts. Maybe remembering is the same thing as imagining. Maybe I had imagined Thomas, imagined a man who loved me so that I could love myself. Imagined a story wherein a handsome stranger had fallen into my lap one summer and made life worthier of living. But then, no, not quite, not perfectly quite. There had been something real about Thomas, about the whole thing. It hadn't been exactly as I remembered, but that didn't negate everything I felt, everything I knew to be true. My question, then, now that it was good and over, was, could it be enough? And it gets a little bit more cheerful towards the end, but I'm going to end it.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite essays in the book, and
Thank you.
it was a lovely reading. I hope you'll indulge me if you let me read the paragraph that's one of my favorites in here that comes a little bit before that.
Yeah.
I just thought this was so amazing. You say so many people had big plans for their lives. All these people in their screenplays, because you were reading screenplays for a job.
Yeah.
Every one of them probably imagined winning, even if they'd misspelled every other word and had neglected to format anything correctly. They'd all shared that private, intoxicating vision of getting what they longed for. But almost none of them would, and almost all of them had been doomed from the start without even knowing it. They wouldn't know it until they were told so. I decided I wanted to know, which is the moment when you're, early in the essay. But I'm just curious. There's so much lovely, layering of memory and the in the moment. Was this a difficult essay to write? Did it take some time and reflection? You say you work very, kind of like you just get it out there. Yeah. Was there a time when you couldn't get this essay out there, or?
This one was hard only because I was writing about love, and I find it hard to write about something so syrupy and something so sweet as love, because I really enjoy writing about pain, and I do bring quite a bit of pain into this chapter. But I guess you will find this out if you read the book, readers out there. But the parts of this chapter before what I just read are very much just like descriptions of what it feels like to be utterly intoxicated by someone, to be really into someone, to spend all your time thinking about someone else, and the way everything just feels so golden when you're in love with someone. And I have found that I maybe struggle with writing stuff like that, because I really enjoy playing with format and tone and expectations. So what I like to do is when I'm writing about something painful or something kind of heavy, that is where I find it very easy to add the humor and sort of subvert expectations about sadness, because I like that. That's my instinct. When I'm writing about being happy or when I'm writing about being in love, I'm just like, God, this is so corny. So I think the reason this is my favorite chapter is because I challenged myself. I was just like, I like many people who think that they're funny, I have that problem of whenever something is serious or whenever something starts to get heavy, you kind of want to turn it around a little bit and make a joke or make it light. When sometimes you just need to be able to either let things be sad or just let things be simply happy and not try to sabotage it so much because you're afraid of it. That's why I really like this chapter, because I really enjoyed the way I pulled it off in a way that I didn't think that I could.
Yeah, no, it's not sappy at all. It's just really, really beautiful. There is one of the most devastating essays in the book is How to Lose a Rabbit, of course, and it is in part a devastating account of being bullied. It's also an account of kind of overcoming that, and it's framed by your kind of life experience looking back later in life. Did writing it down change anything for you about those experiences?
Weirdly, no, because so when I write about something, it truly means that I have settled on my narrative about it. I have truly drawn all the shapes. I have mapped it out. I have that familiar ache in my brain that I can just press, and it no longer brings me that like feeling of urgency or panic. I'm not one of those writers who I really admire and who I kind of wish I was, that the act of writing actually helps them illuminate how they feel about something. I know a lot of people who maybe don't quite know how they feel about any given subject or material until they actually get on the page and they start writing about it. For me, it's more like the narrative that my brain has already made up about something is sort of like the pattern, it's the textile, and I can then make whatever I want out of that. It really, in the act of making something out of it, I don't feel pain, I don't feel vulnerable, I don't feel afraid. I just feel like I am making something according to the way I see it in my head and the way I want it to exist. So when I write stuff like this, like the How to Lose a Rabbit chapter, I was very concerned with accurately portraying the emotions that I would have felt when I was actually living it. I was interested in getting back in my shoes when I was a kid and trying to portray that childlike sense of how the world works and how confused you often are about like why things happen the way they do. Like, for example, the reason, like why my classmates would love Patty so much and not me. Something as a kid I didn't really understand, and so I didn't want to bring a whole bunch of adult wisdom to that situation. I wanted to be able to just sit in the idea of like, this is unfair. I don't know why this is happening. Why are you okay with Patty and not okay when I do the same thing? That sort of sentiment. Yeah, I don't know. I've always found it to be easy. Of course, after I'm done writing and I put the story out into the world, that is quite a different reaction. It's like while I'm writing, I won't even say brave. That's just not where my thoughts are. I'm not thinking about the repercussions. I'm not thinking about like, why aren't you afraid to share this? I just have a design in my head. And then later, once I take the writer's cap off, I'm like, really, dude? Like, why did you do this?
Yeah, but it sounds like you do a lot of writing in your head before you actually put it down.
Oh, for sure. I mostly write into my head.
Yeah, and I think I asked that question because I am that second kind of writer who I get that meaning out of the writing of it.
And I think that's awesome. I think that's really
emotional
cool.
response. Well, it's just a different way.
Exactly. It's different.
And this maybe, I don't know if this is a stupid question or not, but out of that you decided you had kind of a slogan, or at least that you articulated this way: never again. And so I'm curious, is never again something still in your head? Are there addendums to it? Is this some other thing you think comes to that?
Yeah. So I would say yes, and that the reason why sort of ties in with what I'm trying to communicate with that chapter. So for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, the chapter is sort of about being abused in middle school by former friends who were just sort of decided like, oh, you're the gay kid, we're going to pick on you and we're going to ostracize you or whatever. I think that the resulting trauma of that experience sort of nestled in my brain. And what trauma tends to do once it's in your brain is shrink your vocabulary. It gives you only a certain number of ways to describe phenomena, to understand new experiences. So for example, if a friend makes a playful joke about like the way I look or something like that, my sort of trauma response, because of the events that happened to me in middle school, even if I don't necessarily tie it to that, because of the limited vocabulary I have from the experience, it's like, okay, this person's about to betray you. This person thinks you're a joke. This person is out to hurt you, which immediately turns on the response of, I need to either hurt this person back or run away. And that's sort of the fight or flight mechanism that often is involved when something really horrible happens to you and it embeds itself into your brain. And what's even weirder about that sort of situation is that sometimes you don't even think about the actual event anymore. You don't think about the actual traumatic experience. You just have your way of understanding new experiences as informed by that original experience, which is really a mind trip, because then it's sort of like, you don't even know why you're acting the way you think. It's just your personality, or you think it's just the way you are. And sometimes maybe so, but for me, I know that I do a lot of things off of that same fear reaction, off that same people are about to abandon you reaction. So you need to make sure that you're twice as good, that you're really strong, that you're able to take whatever life hands at you and overcome it pretty decisively. Yes, I very much do live that way, because those are the lessons I learned in a very formative part of my life. And it takes a lot of thinking and it takes a lot of healing before you can really work through that and try to expand your vocabulary more and say, no, there are other ways that I can look at this.
And did doing the advice column in general on various subjects, was that there you're kind of reacting to what the reader says, even if you're picking it out. Was that cathartic for you in some cases in terms of how you were expressing your life experience, or not?
Yeah, I would say it's always a pleasurable experience for me to capture my life experiences in writing or in prose. It just feels so good. I know sometimes I did take like one creative writing class in college, and sometimes my professor would be like, but what is the point of this? And I'll be like, it felt good to write. I don't know. I enjoyed myself. Is that not enough for you? That's sort of my approach, because I enjoy putting words together. I enjoy capturing things, illustrating things. And that's really enough for me. With the column, it really was just a medium for me to get the writing I was always sort of doing in a vehicle that was a little bit easier to get in front of other people. I was talking in the book about how I didn't set out to be an advice columnist. I was a freelance writer trying to make ends meet in New York, and this was just an opportunity to do a weekly column, and I didn't really trust myself to come up with a new topic to write about every single week. So I was like, what do I do? And I thought like, oh, in the advice column, they supply you with the prompt. That's great. Later on, I developed more respect for the story tradition of the advice column, and I learned a lot more about what I was engaging in. But all that is to say, I find it immensely pleasurable to write about myself, to just write pretty things, to express things that I want to express. And the advice column has provided me, Hola Papi specifically, has provided me the ultimate vehicle for that. It took off in a way that I never would have expected it to take off. And I don't know if my same writing hadn't existed in that pop cultural vehicle the way it does, if I would even be in this Zoom room. I'm immensely thankful for it. I really am.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to reader questions in a second, but I have one last question for you, and you can just say pass if you'd rather not answer it. But what is the best piece of advice anyone has given you? It's like a typical question, kind of, The
best piece of advice anyone has ever given me is definitely my mom. Right before it was, so I went to Catholic school, grades like elementary to 5th grade. Nothing fancy, because it was my hometown sort of Catholic school, so everything was still sort of like, I don't know, hastily put together, and there were a few nuns in habits, and they called it a day. But I then moved to a public school, and for the first time I had to start actually putting on real people clothes, and I was going to my first school dance, which was terrifying to me because, I was a big kid, I was pretty awkward. And I told my mom before I went to that dance, I was in the car with her and she was about to drop me off, how scared I was. And she just sort of flippantly said, like, ain't nobody looking at you. And I really appreciate that to this day, because it's sort of like, no matter how much attention I get, no matter, like today, for example, I was super anxious about all these reviews, these positive reviews that I was getting, attention I was getting. I was like, someone who dislikes me is going to use this as an opportunity to hurt me, or be overexposed. Oh my God, too many people are seeing me. I think about that from my mom, because it's like, they might see that, but they don't see me. I am sort of my own thing, and I'm pretty safe from these bad faith surface level readings of who I am, because they're not actually thinking about me. They're thinking about themselves while looking at me, because looking is very different from seeing, So, but then of course I did happen to draw a slip of paper from the fishbowl up front and get named Homecoming King. So they were looking at me.
Anyway, so it was more broadly applicable as advice later on.
It made more sense later than it did that night, for sure. I was like, okay, well, no, Mom, like, they're looking.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed, and I'm not going away, but I've enjoyed talking to you, but we are going to go over to the audience questions now. I'm just going to leave.
Bye, Jeff.
So here are the questions, and I'm going to just see which one makes most sense to go with first. I actually was going to ask you this too. You are an incredible visual artist, which is correct. Do you see any intersection between the two forms of art, or is there one that you prefer? Is there some way they intersect?
Yeah, sometimes I'll cheat on one with the other. So if I'm writing and it's not quite working for me, I'll just be like, fine, I'm gonna go draw.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Screw that writing, yeah.
It sometimes brings it back. They're pretty similar in some ways, I would say. It's all about shapes. Everything is shapes to me. Writing is shapes, drawing is shapes. It's just taking the thing in here and finding a way by hook or by crook to get it out there. And that's a negotiation process. It's all a negotiation. So whether I'm writing or whether I'm drawing, I am trying to negotiate physical reality with the abstract reality that's in my head. And they have to sort of meet, and they have to make concessions in both directions. And I find that conversation really exciting. So I enjoy most artistic mediums that are not musical in nature, not because I wouldn't love to make music, but because I have zero talent in that arena. I just love that conversation between what's in your head and what's out there. I'm very fascinated by it. I would love to do it the rest of my life. And I see them both being very much in conversation with each other. I think that it's hard to say which one comes more natural to me, because sometimes it feels like it's drawing, because it's sort of like I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can sort of go into a trance state and just draw. And I don't have to think when I'm drawing. I have to think a lot while I'm writing. But then I also think that my technical abilities as a writer are a little bit more there than they are with art. But I just like doing just for the sake of doing, I'll do any medium you throw at me that has nothing to do with sound. Again, please don't ever invite me to karaoke. I will not.
So related to that, we have a question about how did the process of designing the book's cover go? Did you already have an idea for how you wanted it to look?
Oh, I had a perfect idea, because there was this one pretty iconic illustration for Hola Papi that Felix Deon did when it was at Condé Nast. And it was me in a sombrero at a typewriter in a jockstrap. And I just loved that drawing so much. I wanted him to illustrate the cover, actually. Yeah. But we ended up getting this amazing artist named Sonia Pulido. She lives in a fishing village outside of Barcelona. And we just sort of sent her the brief. And I sort of art directed the whole thing. I knew what color I wanted. I knew that as a visual artist, I wanted to boil down some of the key chapters into singular symbols. So, for example, the rabbit is on the cover, the comet is on the cover, the oak is on the cover. I love symbology like that. I love imbuing an object with deeper meaning. So I definitely wrote out exactly what I wanted. I'm very meticulous about these sorts of things. And I did want something that I could tell was on someone's shelf just by taking a glance.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I'm very much one of those people who's just I can judge a book by its cover, and mine will be pretty.
And by some quirk, we actually wound up ordering 5 of them at different times during the last few months, because Anne ordered 2, and then I ordered 2, and then one mysteriously appeared. So it's all over the house. Another question. How do you feel about the term Hola Papi now? Reclaimed, weird, fun?
It's become such an everyday part of my life that I no longer think about it. So whenever someone brings it up, I saw people are now tagging me in their reviews, which is fine so far because they've all been really positive. But I'm hope that trend dies when they start getting more critical.
They're not supposed to tag you if it's negative.
Yeah. And somebody who tagged me in the review on Instagram of all places kind of went out of their way to be don't worry, the term Hola Papi is reclaimed here, or something like that. And I was just oh, is this a controversial thing to say? Because Hola Papi is such a normal, everyday part of my life now. I've been running Hola Papi for so long. But it is a very fetishistic thing to just say to someone outright, so I get it. It's just that I have now made it my own so much that's my son's name. I don't see it the same way. Yeah, sometimes people on Grindr will be like, Hola Papi, and I'm like, oh, you read the book? And they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. and kind of related, there was a question from Josh, who says, as a Latino born in the U.S., do you ever feel caught between two cultures, you're not Mexican enough, but you also don't fit into mainstream U.S. culture? A question coming from another Latino born in the U.S.
Yeah, so I tend to think of everyone being in possession of a really unique history, and that sort of just fills in the mosaic of what we would understand as any given collective experience. So when we talk about the Mexican American experience, the Mexican experience, the Chicano experience, there are a million words, And it's the fault of language, because no word can possibly encompass all those different experiences and all the different articulations of someone's reality, because there's just too many of us. And so we all sort of bring something different to the table. And I've really made peace with that, because I've stopped trying to perfectly negotiate myself into any one given term, because I see those things as very flexible. I see them as very abstract. Certainly in the past, I have felt very caught between multiple cultures, not just, between Mexico and America, but between Oklahoma and Texas, because Tex-Mex culture is for real. And my family, recently anyway, my family has been Tex-Mex. Before that, they were from Chihuahua, Mexico. But Texas Mexicans are very serious about being Texas Mexicans. And so we were in Oklahoma, and that's sort of like a weird place for Mexicans to be from. And I've just sort of dropped trying to accommodate those labels into my life so much, because if they want me, they want me. If they don't want me, they don't. And I know my experiences. I know my heritage. I know my history, my family. And I just have to be at peace with that, because I can't change the way the world sees me, and I can't change what categories any given person chooses to put me in, for better or for worse. So I have to hold my own understanding of myself in high esteem, and I have to consider it important, because I am the majority stakeholder of the company known as John Paul Brammer.
Yeah, and I thought that you answered some of that too in the essay, How to Be a Real Mexican. I thought that was a really brilliant, layered, wonderful piece. Is there anything you liked about growing up in Oklahoma? I grew up in South Dakota, and now, though in Boston, I still love and yearn for open, flat horizons.
It's one of those things where, like, I can talk shit about Oklahoma, but if anyone else does it, I'm just like, hold on. What are you doing? I am proud to be where I'm from, and not just from Oklahoma, but the specific place in Oklahoma where I'm from, very rural, around a lot of animals, around a lot of nature. The wildlife refuge was not too far from me, and I know it like the back of my hand. And it gave me a deep respect for animals. It gave me a deep respect for the sky. Tornadoes can just choose whenever they want to drop down from the heavens and destroy a town in Oklahoma. I have a pretty religious affiliation, in my mind anyway, with the world around me because of where I grew up. And I think that that's really indispensable. Could I have done without some of the loneliness? Yes. Would it have been nice if I grew up in like an LGBTQ hub city? Yeah, absolutely. Wasn't meant for me, wasn't in the cards. The cosmic lottery threw me where it threw me, and I've made the most of it.
I think that one of the funnier and also like a little creepy moments in the book, though, is where you say you're in Oklahoma. I think you said you were in Oklahoma and get on an app, find someone, and you're like, if I find someone who's within 200 yards of where I am, I know there's a problem because it's like just out in the field, right? So,
if someone is like less than 1 mile away, I'm looking out the window.
Right.
Where are you?
I actually, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, about how Twitter fits into your life or doesn't. Someone says, how do you feel about interacting with fans and readers on Twitter? And how do you feel about Twitter in general?
Oh, I'm hooked on it. It's unfortunate.
Oh, yeah.
What am I going to do about it? Because it's getting to the point where like, there's no like sympathetic way for me to say this. So I'm just going to have to sound horrible. Once you get to a certain number of followers, it's like you stop being a person in most people's eyes. You start becoming a symbol for whatever they have chosen to sort of project onto you. So sometimes you just become a stand-in for whatever someone's mad at in the day, or sometimes people will say things to you that they wouldn't say to a everyday person because they don't see you that way. They see you as having this degree of cultural capital where it's okay to treat you however they want to treat you. And that is difficult to reckon with for a sensitive person who's very attuned to any negative feedback, because I once upon a time saw negative feedback as a matter of survival, where, in my middle school, if someone didn't like me, they could actually enact violence on me. And it really is amazing to me to see these people who are okay with being like the heel on Twitter. Like they'll say things knowing that it'll sort of and they're still tweeting, they're still online. I'm like, this would have destroyed my psyche for like months. And you're like taking it off.
Yeah, I definitely pick my spots in that regard. And I noticed that you do get off Twitter sometimes too. Yes, so you like have micro breaks. I would call it.
I have a really good friend who makes a really good point. He's just like, you should really just pay someone to like Tweet out your articles. Tweet out whenever you have a new book coming out.
No, we'd miss you. Well, I mean, if you have to, but I would miss you.
I would miss Twitter. Nothing makes me laugh like Twitter. That app has sort of
that's true.
Caused my brain into an altogether different form that now I can only laugh at Twitter stuff. So it's just like, what do I do?
Yeah. So I think we have time for a couple more questions, or we'll see. How have you ever been asked a question you were afraid to answer because the answer would be too personal?
Ooh, I'm such an open book. I've never outright said, I don't want to talk about that before. I'm sure I'll meet some in the process of this book. Because so far, people have been so charitable with me. Let me knock on wood. They've been really just keen to know more about me and to learn things about the behind the scenes of the book that I find really interesting to talk about, my craft as a writer. People are kinder than I give them credit for sometimes. It's been really touching because, I'm always in defense mode a little bit preemptively, just like, okay, let's just make sure that we know what we're getting into. I've been so happy to see the responses and the questions I've gotten so far. And I'm very typically happy to answer them because I don't see myself as being someone who is interesting or secretive enough to really hold a lot of things close to my chest.
Right. So one last question, and I think this applies also to different formats. So how did you get comfortable being so vulnerable in front of a large audience? And I think that also applies to is it different for you doing an event like this or a live event? I don't know how much you've done of that before having a book out. I have a feeling you probably have, but
Yeah, I've been practicing being vulnerable to many, many strangers for a long time now. And at some point it just became second nature to me where I don't really think about it too hard. As long as I'm not in physical danger, I'm okay. The bar is pretty high for me, isn't it? I'm just I don't see it as vulnerability, I guess, because I happen to know that I am an architect in some ways, and I've engineered all these things pretty much specifically to the parameters I set out to make them. So I'm just sometimes people are oh, that was so vulnerable of you to say. And it's that was very designed. I took a lot of time to organize, create, illustrate, manifest, whatever it is what we're both looking at. So for me, I'm very happy to talk about anything about it because I'm just I made this thing specifically to attract your interest or that we could both get something out of it. So let's talk about it. On the other hand, I guess, it's really strange. I'm a person who is very shy in real life, except when I'm expected to perform in some way. And then some other office in my head turns the lights on and starts getting things in order. Otherwise, if I'm just I'm recently starting to socialize again for the first time after a long time.
Oh God, yeah.
It's a lot of just me standing somewhere.
Right.
And I'll just be looking around and I'll have my drink right here. And I'm sort of hoping someone approaches me and asks me something interesting to talk about. Otherwise, I feel like a non-person, sort of. It's very strange. I need to look into that deeper. But I'm just give me a book, give me a stage or whatever. I'll do what I need to do. Put me in a house party. I'm not having a good time.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much. I'm just so happy to have been part of your book release day, and congratulations on how well it's gone. This was a wonderful conversation for me. So
thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you both. This conversation was funny. It was heartfelt. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and based on the chat, I'm not sure if you saw, our audience did thoroughly.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
And so to our audience, thank you for joining us tonight. If you have yet to purchase a copy of Hola Papi, you can click on the handy green button center of your screen. It'll be coming with a signed book plate. And on that note, thank you everyone and have a fantastic evening.
Bye everyone.